Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. Thanks for coming tonight. I've got a really good guest, a fun guest. I know you'll enjoy it. We're going to talk about a topic I think that's close to most everybody's heart. We're talking about a bit about finances and spirituality and mysticism. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation with Jay Taffet tonight. My next week's guest is Marion Massey, who wrote a book called Dancing with God. I'm looking forward to talking with Marion. She's going to be an excellent guest, so be sure and tune in next week. Before I get to tonight's guest, let me tell you a bit about the Spiritual Broadcasting Network, what we're doing and why we're doing it, and a little bit about our plans for the future. It's really started with the Spiritual But Not Religious show and kind of grew from there. As I looked at that community, the Spiritual But Not Religious community, we began to realize just how huge a community that is. Actually, in the United States alone, 1/5 of the population declares itself as being spiritual but not religious. That's a huge number of people. That's like 20% of our population. That didn't exist back in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. So, there's been a big shift. I think a lot of that has been brought about by the internet, science most definitely, and we've had to look for some new kinds of ways to connect with the higher power, because on some level, people who are spiritual but not religious believe there's a higher power of some sort, but not necessarily what they were taught, not necessarily their father's God or their mother's God. And so people are searching. And the other thing is that, this real quest for spirituality kind of starts about late 30s, early 40s. And our population has aged. We have a large population of baby boomers, if you will. And so that also attributes to the reason for the large numbers. But because of the diversity of our belief system, most of us don't attend a church. We have no real place to connect together and no place to have a voice. Those numbers of people really need a place to have a voice. And so what we do on the Spiritual But Not Religious show is bring you as many of those diverse voices as we can. And we're laying the foundation now, putting the software and hardware structure underneath it so that we can begin to bring you many, many more shows by many, many different hosts with many different belief systems. So we're very close at this point, so you want to be sure and watch for that. So that's a bit about the show and about the Spiritual Broadcasting Network. My guest tonight is Jay Taffet. He wrote The Zen of Financial Peril. Jay's a pretty interesting guy. I think you'll enjoy tonight's show. By the way, the chat room is working now, so it's on the tab right next to the video there. And if you like, you're welcome to jump into that chat room. Tom monitors that. Tom Johnson, who handles Tom is actually a partner here with Spiritual Broadcasting Network, handles actually he's our technician, handles all the software and the hardware for us during the showtime, and he actually produces the show and books the guests and so forth. So Tom will be there, and if you have a question, you want to join in, you're welcome to it. He'll see that I get the question, and we'll bring it on in for Jay. So Tom, we got Jay on the phone.
Yes, we do, George. I'm releasing.
All right. Good evening, Jay.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Doing well, thank you.
Doing good. Well, you're looking really good. The quality of your video is good tonight. Sound is good, so I think we'll have a really good show here, Jay. I have really enjoyed your book. We have a great deal in common. You've got a much stronger aviation background than I do. You were a jet pilot, if I'm not mistaken. You tried for fighter jets, is that right?
That's right. Actually, a third-generation Air Force pilot.
Third generation. So almost a requirement then.
You're the birthright, for sure.
I've been a private pilot since '78. I haven't been flying here for the last few years, but I'm about to get back into it. My son-in-law flies for Cessna in their managed aircraft division. He's a jet pilot. Matter of fact, he takes their pilots on their check rides.
Sure, isn't that neat? Wow.
Yeah, so he's got a nice cushy job, out of town 7 days and back in town 7 days, and nice big fat paycheck. So it's not a bad deal. Gets to ride around on his Harley and play a little bit for a week. So the other thing that we have in common is you were I don't know, maybe still are, a real estate developer?
Yes, I am.
I was a real estate broker for many years in Michigan, where I started back in the late '60s, and in Fort Myers in Lee County, down south of where we are now. I'm no longer in the real estate business, but I bought and sold houses and had a pretty large brokerage. So we've got a lot more in common than what we even knew to begin with. One of the things, Jay, our audience is going to be curious about before we get into talking about your book, is about you and about your background. So you give us a little idea how you were raised in your spiritual life as growing up. Were you raised in an Orthodox religion, or no religion, or?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was born and raised Jewish in a conservative Jewish household. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I started gravitating towards more Orthodox Judaism and went to Israel, spent 6 weeks studying in the yeshiva there in the Old City, and found a lot of very meaningful, enriching themes and practices in my life.
Are you into the mystic end of that with the Kabbalah?
At the time I was not. Just starting out in the Orthodox realm, coming from the conservative tradition, it really wasn't encouraged until you kind of mastered, the tenets of Torah and Talmud and other important texts. At the time I wasn't, but in the last 4 or 5 years, as I gravitated towards more universal spirituality, I'm surely living, with the themes of Kabbalah in mind and other disciplines and practices as well.
Right. Well, about a year ago, we had a rabbi on from Jerusalem. Yeah, he was a really good guy. Of course, the time difference, he had to stay up pretty late to talk with us. But boy, he just was a really good guy. He does a lot of music in his spiritual practice. In a band, they kind of carry a message. Yeah, well, the thing I noticed about your book is the mystic aspect of that, and that was why I wondered if maybe you were raised with some kind of a mystic background. You used the word Zen. Are you Buddhist?
No, that title has caused a lot of controversy, George.
Well, I bet it's supposed to. You want people. Well, what's that title?
That's what I was going for. But my first interview on television, the book has nothing to do with finance, as you know from reading it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first question I got on television, a live interview, was, so Jay, tell us about how to correct your finances, because obviously that's what your book is about. That's got nothing to do with my book.
The guy, whoever the interviewer was, hadn't even bothered reading the book.
Not even my media release, clearly.
Wow.
Yeah, so, I think that because I spent the last 5 years starting this business on this entrepreneurial journey to build private aviation terminals, FBOs, and it didn't matriculate in the time frame I had hoped and with the investment that I had projected for it. And so there was a lot of financial setbacks, challenges, and crisis. And so I thought the interplay of Zen, which is calm and centering and awareness, and financial peril, which was about my journey, would kind of be an interesting and compelling title. But apparently I confused a lot of people.
Sometimes confusion is not a bad thing. We just want them talking about us, Jay. That's the main thing.
Absolutely. In fact, a friend of mine who saw the title when I first sketched it out about 1.5 years ago, she said to me, and she's very blunt, which I love about her, she said, "That makes no sense at all. Why don't you have a subtitle so people like me understand this?"
What's interesting, I've written a book myself, and the title is so hugely important, and I think I had a sense of how important it was, but until after it was out there, I really didn't know just how important it was. But,
yeah.
So you're talking about FBOs then, is that right?
Yeah, I endeavor to build my own brand of FBOs, private air terminals.
What is your differentiating theme that made you want to? Because you wanted to do it on a multiple level, didn't you? It was pretty large scale.
Yeah, having been in general aviation for 23 years and in the last 4 or 5 years of in the real estate developer prior to starting this business, flying around the Southeast, seeing lots of different FBOs, I realized one thing, George, and you might have noticed this yourself, that a lot of the larger chains build FBOs to cater to the VIP in the back.
Absolutely.
That's the decision. It's the pilot that spend 8 hours there waiting for the VIP to come back that needs to be comfortable. So I designed a terminal, actually myself, to scale over about a year and a half. And the sub-theme of the business was designed by pilots for pilots. So the entire layout, the entire service model, everything about the facility and the operation was from a pilot's perspective, which is what was compelling enough for airport authorities at Huntsville and Panama City at their new airport to accept my business plan and to approve me.
Right. So have you gotten to the place where you have a terminal up somewhere?
No, that was the matriculation of the book and the journey. I had I had 3 investor groups in the last 5 years that dropped out actually on the day of lease signing, which was
wow.
Yeah. And, obviously the plan was executed well, and the airport authority approved me, which is usually the moonwalk to get accomplished. But, as the economy started to slow down, the fuel volume started stabilizing and decreasing, which was a scary variable for investors to look at. So, inevitably they fell out. Typically, you expect to spend 5 years with the airport authority dancing around, but they were excited about the concept of Regency Air Center. Still are.
Right. The economy's kind of played a huge role in this for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly has. I mean, the fuel volume certainly didn't help the momentum of Regency Air Center for sure.
Right. So one of the things you say is you were plagued by the past and anxious for the future, and that really speaks to the consciousness of an awful lot of people. Tell us a bit about like that for you. What was going on where you were that you were feeling that way?
Sure. I just reached a point in life where I realized that I'm kind of living on a sine curve. I have these incredible spikes of success and then incredible dips of, well, I don't use the word failure anymore, but just to use the word failure.
Right.
And I realized that it's becoming a Groundhog Day. and then the realization started to set in. It took many years to develop it to a book, obviously. But the realization that the past is irrelevant. I mean, and the more that credence and attention we give it, the more it does become a reality in the present moment. And I won't even talk about the future. The future doesn't exist. I mean, it's just a fabrication of a frontal lobe, if you ask me.
Right, total imagination.
Total imagination.
So, the thing I noticed in the way you dealt with that was like the power of now, Edgar Tolle's work.
Yeah.
Is that are you familiar with Tolle? You read Tolle?
Very much. I mean, it's one of the pivotal books I read when I began my transformation. It's a very powerful writer. The themes are just incredible.
Well, the thing that I saw all the way through your book, Jay, was the fact that you had read a lot, because a lot of the really high spiritual principles are in your book in very ordinary, kind of understandable terms, and just pretty much anybody can pick up and put to work almost immediately for them if they're interested in that. So, yeah, as a matter of fact, if you're out there listening, even if the title is confusing, don't let that worry you. If you're trying to put your dreams and your finances and your spirituality all together and get it on track, this book will help you out. So you said that each success was just a way station for the next stumble, or worse, for failure. And I guess you were feeling that you just, even though you were able to create success, you weren't feeling like you were in charge of all of that.
Yeah, and really I didn't know the distinction at the time between achievement and success. Achievement is something that we attain in the physical world, and we can actually point at it and make it an object. You know, I've achieved this. But true success is evolution. And I had achieved a lot by the time I'd written my book, but I've not really felt success and didn't really understand how the evolutionary properties of success can transform you, make you become a more aware, enlightened person. And once I stumbled across that distinction, then really the book started writing itself in my mind.
Right.
I had a friend ask me recently how long did it take me to write the book. I said, you know, about 2.5 months. I mean, it came at me faster than I could write.
Yeah, that's what happened with me too. Same thing.
Because once you unlock, you know, the same inner knowledge we all have, once you get past the mind and what it's trying to govern and skew in terms of your perspective, then yeah, I mean, we just kind of relearn what we've always known. And so it kind of wrote itself. Now, the editing took months because I just couldn't let the creative process end, you know.
I totally know. Until I wrote a book, I had no. When someone said that art was never finished, I didn't understand what they were talking about. But I got a good idea now.
And I'll tell you what, when the books arrived, George, even after I prolonged the editing process, really made my designer really mad by changing words on the last day before it went to the printer. Even when the books came back to me from the printer,
right,
I couldn't open them up. I did not want to see if I missed something.
Well, you get ready. You're all ready for a second and third edition before you've sold the first copy. I totally hear. So, what's interesting? One of the interesting things, Jay, was that you were working. Who were you working for at the time you decided to just drop it all? And what were you doing at that point?
I was a commercial real estate developer with a company here in Montgomery called Aeronaut.
Uh-huh.
My last project was working on a large resort in Panama City called Aqua. Just a developer on that project.
So you spent quite a bit of time in Panama City. That's a nice spot up there. A little
Sure, yeah.
little too cold for me in the winter, but summers are pretty nice up there. Well, at the same time, you also decided to take on a huge transformational journey. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I realized if I was going to have the courage to make a professional leap of faith like this, I might as well throw all the dice on the table at the same time. And the really weird aspect of me taking a joint transformation, professionally and emotionally, physically, spiritually, all the different spheres, is I've never been a risk taker before. And I'm a risk taker, even a measured risk taker, because of fear.
Right.
And when I realized I had the courage to make this jump, let's use that courage to see, let's take the thing out for a test drive and see what it can do. And so I physically cleaned out my house of past that I didn't want to have around, cleared out my mind and intellectually, cleared out myself spiritually, emotionally, and just really kind of reset the clock. And, I can talk about it now in a fluid way, but it was a painful process.
Yeah.
Your mind the entire time is telling you not to do that because it knows it's going to lose control and its governing impact it has in our lives. So it took a lot of unhinging to reach a point that I could even think about writing a book about, to be honest. I mean, it was a very much of a caving process before it became a blooming process.
Well, Socrates said that the unexamined life was not worth living, and the sense I got from your book was that you did a real inventory on yourself, psychologically and morally and just across the board. Am I right?
I did. I mean, I was fortunate to be working at home at the time that I made that jump, so I'm working out of my home office, and so I'm pretty disciplined. I wake up every morning, shower, get dressed, make up my bed, come down the home office, down the hall, in 8 or 9 hours, and I would take breaks throughout the day just to focus. I figured if I'm going to be working, as hard as I am on the project, why not make myself the same kind of project at the same time and just make it a parallel path? And the goal was to reach the consummation of the business and an evolution of myself at the same time.
So have you had a mentor? You didn't mention a mentor. Have you had a mentor in this process of the self-examination process and your business process?
No, as you mentioned earlier, just a combination of what I've read in this genre of positive living and spirituality. I mean, a lot of my favorites are Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, Doreen Virtue, of course, Celtic way of seeing. I just really fused all kinds of spiritual traditions and some Buddhism as well. And I want to thank you, by the way, for pointing out, you should be my publicist, George. That was my goal, to take very sophisticated spiritual concepts that a lot of people can't approach when they first start and just make it ordinary.
Right.
Make it a comfortable, everyday practical experience.
Well, your book is well written, Jay, and it's a good read. It's jam packed with good stuff, and it's a pretty easy read. So I'd recommend it to anybody that's wanting to make some changes in their life. So you say you came to a point where you were frightened and just wanted to return to where you'd come from, and then you said it all became clear. What became clear?
The fear itself. That I was frightened to continue this journey of something that I knew I had to do to evolve into the person that I wanted to be.
Uh-huh.
And the only thing keeping me from reaching that shore was fear. And then once I started looking at where does fear come from the mind, from the anxiety of the future, from the pain of the past, I started realizing that we're standing on a bridge over the present moment of opportunity, and we have, these demons on either side of us that don't exist.
Well, we certainly have the demons, don't we?
Yeah, and the demons are all fabricated. I was thinking the other day, I was telling a friend of mine about this, all the demons that we've ever illustrated in horror movies or in pictures and paintings, they're human faces that are contorted out of anger or despair or pain of some sort.
Negative emotions.
Negative emotions actually become matriculated into a physical appearance.
We are victimized by our own negative emotions, and until we get into meditation and a few other prayer and some other things, we have a hard time getting a handle on all of that.
True, and I've tried to communicate. I recently did a presentation on campus for students and faculty, and I stressed the central theme that we are not our thoughts and feelings. And I allowed a pregnant pause, and there was wide eyes in the crowd. And I said, we're not. They're just electronic transmissions that you have a choice to open and accept. It's not mandatory. And I use this example. All day long we say to ourselves, I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, I'm feeling pain. But you never say to yourself, I am a hurt knee, I am a sore elbow, I'm an upset stomach. Huh. We don't, because we think the physical manifestation of that electronic transmission is separate from us. So is a thought. It's the same thing. It's our choice.
What's interesting to me about the brain is I came to see it for what it is, and the mind, and it's really just an elaborate spreadsheet that does a whole lot of what ifs, and it believes itself to be in charge of the whole deal, and that's not the way it's supposed to be at all, is it?
Absolutely not. So
you have a nice bit of prose that I liked. You say that uncertainty is the garden of opportunity. How do you see that?
Well, just like you said, the mind is all about structure. It's all about governing our actions and thoughts and really the entire process of our life. So the moment you look beyond the structure, the labyrinth, that's where you see the opportunity. The uncertainty is what the mind can't predict or form in some type of calculation or projection. And once you realize your mind can't do it, that's where the opportunity is to evolve and find your next evolution in life.
There's another thing in there, Jay, that's that plays into this fear thing for everybody who thinks about going into business for themselves. Looking at what you're attempting to do or doing, not attempting, what you're doing. It's huge. It's a big job. A lot of obstacles, a lot of difficulties in trying to get there to make this happen. But that's a two-edged sword, really, because on the one hand, the difficulty kind of works against us, but on the other hand, the difficulty really works for us, because if the difficulty weren't there, there would be thousands of people, and you would make McDonald's wages if you accomplished it. So, it's all this, viewpoint is so hugely important in all this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And just like you said, the challenge, the difficulty of it is what makes it worth doing. And I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. I've actually consulted with a lot of entrepreneurs throughout different industries. And I have probably turned away 90% of the people that have approached me to help them walk through an entrepreneurial process, the actual venture plan itself. I ask one question. Are you in love with this idea?
Right.
And 90% say, well, no, I think it'll make a lot of money. And I said, well, don't get married.
Absolutely, right? Because, yes, sir, I totally understand that. The other part about that in itself is kind of a two-edged sword, isn't it? You get so in love with it you can't see clearly on some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So you say we can't stop our mind, but we can separate ourselves from its functioning, observe what it's doing, and protect ourselves from the impact of what it generates. My question with that is, if we're not our mind and we can back up as the observer and watch ourselves, who is that? What is that? What name would we call that?
You know, that's a good question. As you saw in my book, I danced around that, and I used the word soul.
Yeah.
A lot of people are opposed to the idea of soul. I mean, you know, a lot of the higher thinkers talk about self. But in my mind, our true essence is all connected. So we're all part of the same energy and information that is the living world.
Right.
So we're clearly connected to each other as humans, as well as, you know, the rest of the living world of animals and plants, everything. So, you know, I use the word soul because soul to me is the conduit into this energy and information. You know, when I try to explain this to people in my life that don't really, you know, think about spirituality this way, they see it as going to organized religion and praying in a certain way.
Right.
You know, I said, look, it doesn't take a certain lifestyle to believe this. It just takes a certain bit of rational perspective. That once you understand that your thoughts have not been your friend, then there's got to be something that's propelled you into successful situations. And that's really what the book is kind of hinged on, is let's explore that. What are you connected to that has brought you success?
Well, see, I've spent the last, almost 30 years following my intuition. I made a conscious decision I was going to follow my intuition, which I believe dips into that well that you talk about in your book. And I can't even imagine trying to live back before that times, because like you, I've come to this place, Jay, where, you know, I'm not sure that the final destination is what really allows us to claim success. Because for me, the journey, that's the success. And it's the movement along the path. It's the willingness to try something new. And you really had a nice word using the word achievement. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I like that.
Thank you.
And achievements, you know, is exactly that. It's achievement. But this, you know, we're just so conditioned to see success in some ways I don't think are very healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing about the time element, even if you accept the idea that, you know, the journey is what really truly evolves you and makes you more enlightened, more self-aware, the element of time keeps tripping us up. You know, you have a certain expectation, a certain projection of when you will reach that successful point, and you don't reach it in a certain time period, and then you start losing faith in your ability to evolve your life the way you want to.
Yeah.
Now, time is something that we created just to organize our lives, and so the mind feels comfortable. It's on a chartered path. It doesn't exist. And once we accept it doesn't exist, except to make an appointment or show up for this interview, we never feel like we've failed because we're still on the journey, and we will reach the destination.
Absolutely. I had a little thing on my refrigerator, something about, you know, like if you don't feel good or something, it's not over, and you know it's not over until it's over, and that's kind of how it is, isn't it? The fat lady's got to sing before there's any kind of completion, if you will. You know, the other thing you talk about here, which I think has a lot to do with, the choices that we make and what we're going to do and what's important to us. See, I believe that, and you have it really kind of encapsulated in your aviation idea, and that is your the service. And because that's what I heard you talk to, is you want to serve the pilot. And I think that's a huge part of whether, you know, I can call myself successful, and I could be a billionaire, and if all I had was selfish self-centeredness working for me, I'm not sure just how successful I was. But if I really helped people, then I think probably I'm more successful. And I get that feeling from you in your book that that's where you're at.
No, absolutely. And I know it sounds like a cliche as an author, especially author to author. But, you know, the reader responses I've received so far have just been humbling. It's the best word to describe. I mean, it's really transformed lives as much as it transformed mine, these things. And when you change just one life, but based on offering this kind of perspective and insight, you know, I fulfilled my destiny. I mean, I truly have served the way I want to serve. I truly want this to be a commercial success as well, and serve as many people as possible, of course. But you know, when you can change one life through insight and perspective this way, it changes yours, and you both evolve to the place you're supposed to be.
You know, this, whether you want to call it karma or what goes round comes around, or whatever you might want to call it, I'm convinced that that law, that principle, is a reality. And I've spent the last good many years working at putting out nothing but good, because that's really what I want coming back in my direction. And, you know, I've had so many things that have happened that are really good that I can't attribute to anything except that, you know, that conscious awareness of that.
And that really goes back to connectedness. If we're all part of the same energy and information that is the living world, if we do something bad, then we just affected ourselves.
Yeah, what I do good for you is good for me.
Exactly, I mean, because if we're all connected in that way, then, you know, you're hurting yourself or hurting somebody else. Why would you want to humiliate somebody or physically hurt somebody or cause any type of suffering? Because you're going to experience it yourself.
Absolutely. So, well, but here's the real I don't know if you want the real criminal in all of that, and that is the ego. How does the ego play in all this for you? You talk about the ego in your book.
Well, you know, the ego is very.
I'm sorry. It's kind of a two-edged sword, isn't it?
No, absolutely. Without ego, you cannot survive in the physical world. You have to use ego in a very sparing but self-preservation style. You know, and I think I talked about in the book that, yeah, if you're in a fight or flight situation and you have no choice but to fight, you better hope you have your ego or you're going to lose.
Right.
But of course, you want to avoid that. But, you know, the ego is making choices all the time for us, making decisions that are just unhealthy. And the thing is, it's just like observing the mind. We don't have to censor the ego. The point is not to put ego in timeout and say you're wrong. That just creates inner tension. Just realize what it's doing. Feel the shortness of breath. Feel the sweat. Feel the anger. Feel the hair in the back of your neck come up. Realize all these primitive things that are happening to you because your ego has been enraged, and say, okay, well, I feel ego. I am not going to act out ego. It really is that simple, and you'll find it neutralized in seconds.
And I totally agree. The issue, though, is what we talked about earlier, and that is the idea that we can see ourselves as victim to that part of ourselves, those negative feelings and emotions. And until I do an inventory, until I start to see my behavior, it's difficult to come out from behind that to where you really are more in charge.
Absolutely, and that's why the last chapter of the book, Faith and Constitution, basically says, you know, the last 6 chapters of insight and perspective and these important themes, sure, you might believe it, but the truth is it means nothing unless you have the faith in yourself and the Constitution to begin living your life this way. That's the tough part. That's really tough.
It is. It's the hard part of the whole thing. Well, but you know what? We tend to want to deny that darker part of our nature. To ourselves, certainly, but mostly to the people around us. We don't want them to think badly of us. You know, we want people to think really well of us. And boy, that denial will keep you trapped for a long time, won't it?
Sure. Well, you know, and certainly social censor is a powerful weapon. You know, that we don't want to show the bad sides of ourselves. You know, but that really goes back to, I'm sure you identify with the theme, there's no such thing as good and bad. I mean, if we do have an ego response to something, and it does happen to manifest in a physical way in a social dynamic, we can apologize, and that alone neutralizes the ego right there. You know, that there's still a human capacity to a spiritual perspective, and you know, people, you know, we're all the same as people. We all have the same kind of responses, same conditions, you know, responses and situations. But just being accountable for how we've acted humanly, that I think is what creates the goodness in the world.
You know, one of the things that that is so fantastic about the times that we live in, Jay, is that, you know, like your book and Tully's book, and, you know, I get a whole list of authors' book and interviews and just all this information that's available to us via the internet now is making for huge transformations. I think we're seeing the part of the result of that in the Middle East. What do you think?
No, absolutely. There's no question about it. For years we've always had these war rallies and this feeling that we're kind of grouped and we're victimized. In the Middle East, it's certainly been just a hotbed of strife. But once people start feeling liberated on their own, then together they bond into a liberation movement. Part of that connectedness theory, that if a handful of people feel that they do have the right to live in a certain way, then it's just going to spread. I mean, the idea is going to spread in a spiritual way that has to unhinge, bondage.
Well, as I understand spirituality, I think it demands democracy. It really that's part of the whole idea of spirituality, and the internet has really democratized information, and just the fact that I have this show right now, and that I'm able to broadcast to anyone who's willing to listen. 15 or 20 years ago, there were 5 or 6 companies that held that in their grip, and it was the information they wanted to feed us. We still get it on television now, but Fox News and and others, that point of view that they want to sell us. That fortunately we're kind of coming out from behind that because of the internet. It's phenomenal stuff.
No, absolutely right. I mean, you remember the commercial in the 80s, AT&T, it's an exciting time to be alive? Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, that's what it is about the internet when it comes to the kind of thinking that we can talk about right now on the Skype calls. I mean, it's quite phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to say that spirituality has become so universal that there's no more stereotypes of who can feel like they're in a spiritual place in their life. I mean, we all are starting to identify with the same energy that we share.
Yeah, and you know what, Jay? I think one of the things that you talk about in your book is about the fear aspect of this, and I think so many people are caught in their religious belief, oftentimes without even realizing it, by fear. Fear has them bound, and not knowing that there are other alternative ways to believe that a lot of people believe. That how we believe spiritually plays a huge role in how we live our life.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we're acculturated, the way that our parental models we grew up under, it all certainly adds to the texture of who we become. And again, because the mind governs our life, and as you mentioned, it's got the worst memory banks of all time. It's just a giant spreadsheet with flaws, essentially.
Right.
As we get older, we start to believe that what we know is really that all exists. Do you remember that part in my book where I talk about the information pie?
Yes.
Where that if all the information in the world was a pie, what we know of that information of the entire living world,
minuscule,
is maybe the sliver of an atom. What we don't know is maybe the size of an atom, and what we don't know is the entire pie. And that is the journey. It's to relearn what we already know inside of ourselves that's been conditioned and skewed by our brains, by our minds.
Well, what's really interesting about those facts, Jay, is that that we could be caught in the idea that we need to be right.
Yeah.
Boy, that we got a lot of static in the background, don't we, Tom? Are you on a speakerphone?
I am.
Because we're getting a whole lot of static for some reason or other, Jay.
Is this better?
Oh yeah, much better.
Okay.
Better, Tom? Oh boy, yeah, big difference. Hey, you used the word mystic and mysticism, and I've recognized myself as a mystic for 25 years or more, maybe 30, and I use the word mystic. I use it in my writing, and what I've found is that there's a real stigma attached to the word. It's taken a real beating over the years. What's been your experience with that?
The same thing, as I mentioned in Chapter 5 about classical mysticism, is that it's been associated with the dark side, the dark influence of, again, organized religion. I think shot it through that prism that if it's something beyond the purview of a congregational belief or a certain liturgy, but yet in the same spiritual vein, then it's got to be something that's counterintuitive to religion. And that's not true. I mean, the beginning of any type of religious belief thousands of years ago believed in the idea of spiritual currency, and we all share the same bond to it. It's just in recent years, I think, in the rational scientific era that we've said, well, if you believe in the idea that you can attract something into your life because of the spiritual energy, then just can't, you're just going to set all by yourself. But clearly that's not true, and we know that, George, that we all live in the same energy and information that is the living world, and that is mysticism. It's knowing you have the ability to attract those resources into your life and to see with insight, not just with your eyeballs. And there's a big difference.
Yeah, one of the things about mysticism is one of the things that describes it, that defines mysticism, is the ability to find that connection with a higher power, God, source, whatever you want to call it, on an inner level without an intermediary. And that was anathema to organized religion, because they lived on that whole idea, and they the propaganda that the beating that mysticism took, I think, had its basis, roots in that a lot. You look back at the Catholic Church, and they didn't really care so much, I think, what you believed, but that they were in control.
Yeah. And, every religious tradition has said the same thing, but the most recent example is what Jesus said himself, that look within, that's where you find the power of God, the power of the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And every religious tradition has said that if we look within with insight and with that perspective that we're part of divinity, then we are a partnership with God in creation. We're not just a subject of it. We are a part of God's divine sparks.
Well, one of the things that the mysticism, I think, has, in the last 35 years or so, since the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi finds, the texts that came out of there were mystical texts, and they certainly gave a different view of, say, the Gnostics and so forth that were around during those times, because what we knew up until those texts was only what we got from the enemies of that mysticism. And so it's pretty interesting, amazing things. You have a very interesting view on the soul. I had not thought of it in those concepts, and I'm not sure that I agree or disagree, but I do find it really interesting. Give us that definition. How you see the soul? What do you see the soul as?
The soul is the portal that we have access to as in our corporeal form to all the energy and information that is living world, that connectedness that talks about is the spiritual pole. And the soul doesn't belong to us. And I think that's really a radical part of the book, where I say that we don't own our soul. It's not something you can contain in our bodies. The soul is something that's around us and in front of us, and it's our entire essence. And it's through that you gain the insight, wisdom, and perspective and knowledge that makes you truly self-aware and enlightened. And once you realize you have those two distinct spheres of your mind, which is limited and trying to govern your life, and your soul, which is unlimited and doesn't want any control, then why wouldn't you choose to live a life through a soul-based perspective versus a mind-based perception?
Absolutely. A few years back, and I don't even recall who I read that suggested that, and now that I'm hearing you speak it, I think we're talking the same thing with different semantics, is that the soul is really consciousness itself, which is energy, so yeah. And consciousness doesn't need the control. It's strictly the mind that needs that.
Exactly right. And the fact that soul is consciousness, you become conscious by recognizing you have a soul.
Right.
And that's just Socratic logic.
Exactly. You also talk about extrasensory perception. Tell us about your view there.
Well, the underlying assumption there is that there's no such thing as time. That past, present, future really it all exists together. Time is circular in that way. And so, if you are tapped into the soul portal, if you are part of a connectedness that is the living world, why wouldn't you see the past and the future in different circumstances? And if we're connected to everything that is the living world, why wouldn't you see things that would happen to other people and different catastrophes throughout the world? In my mind, it's just logical. Once you accept the fact that we're connected to the entire living world, then of course you have the ability to see. It's the mind that filters what we can accept that we just experienced. And again, just like mysticism, people that have the ability to be ESP have been marginalized because of that. But there's not one person on earth who's not experienced some type of uncanny situation where they just knew it was going to happen. Well, that's a rational prism for explaining what we all have, and that is the intuition to see beyond what we can see with our eyeballs.
Well, and you know what's interesting about that whole thing, Jay, is that you know that extrasensory perception, psychic channeling, whatever form it took, for years was by organized religions, you called it a cult, you know, and it was a cult, and it was of the devil, and it was a bad thing. But at the same time, within their own confines, their own religious beliefs, they're practicing the same things, calling them with different terminology. Which is a, you know, it's all pretty, and it comes right back to what you talk about in the book, is that egos need to control, the minds need to control.
Yeah. And you got to have dominion. You have to have a monopoly on it in order to feel that you're empowered. But we've certainly distorted the definition of empowerment in the human world, and empowerment is actually empowering other people through the insight and perspective that we have.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I forget exactly how you say it. You talk about personal power and the importance of personal power, and I'm with you there. It's like it takes power to forgive. It takes power to love just as much as it takes power to hate. You know, it takes power to be grateful.
And it takes extreme power to love yourself enough that you actually want to serve in this world. And I think a lot of self-loathing is what stops people from actually becoming the kind of people they want to be. And that self-loathing is clearly encouraged by the mind.
So
there's no reason to hate ourselves. And there's no reason, if we are part of a soul currency, part of the soul portal that is the whole living world, and we wouldn't want to hate ourselves and kill ourselves. We would want to be part of it and experience life as it's supposed to be. But the mind senses failure, and the mind wants to eradicate failure through eliminating us.
You know, in my journey of the self-examination, and it's certainly not over. I think it's an ongoing process. You know, what I found was my attachment to looking at my failures, my dark sides, my inadequacies, rather than looking at the good part of me. And it's like, you know, wherever your focus is, that's what you're going to experience. And so, you know, being able to, that's a huge benefit of doing an inventory. You start to really realize that, hey, I've got some good stuff and I've got some bad stuff. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater here.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And even though I say the past is irrelevant, I mean, it's important to mind the past experiences and learn the lessons, and that's it. Close the door and never open it again. It's completely irrelevant the rest of your life.
So you talk about wants and desires, and the fact that they are definitely different. Tell us what that means to you.
Yeah, the want is mind-based. It's acquisitive. It's about pleasure, and there's nothing wrong with a want, but
Right.
It's just important to know that if it comes from the mind, it's fallible, and it's not always achievable because it comes from a place that's already flawed itself. Desire is the pollen of the soul. It's about evolution. It's about growth. It's about aspiring to be something beyond yourself that you are now. And that's where the real, I guess the rubber meets the road in my book is I make the claim that we get every desire in our life. You might not get what we want, but we always get what we desire. But it's understanding the distinction of what you wanted and what you desired is where you find the empowerment to know that you have the ability to get everything you want, everything you desire in this life, not everything you want.
Yeah, I think you actually point out that you know, oftentimes it's a hidden desire that we're unaware of that's blocking us from the, you know, like what we want or the desire that another desire that we're doing, which really is only evident through some kind of self-examination, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. And that's the process of past inventory that I talked about in Chapter 5 in Practical Mysticism. That, if you don't mind me just saying just real briefly how it works.
Oh no, please do. Yeah, please do.
It's where you look back in your life, the most painful moments or the most painful experience you've ever had, and take a real good look at it and be honest about the assessment of it. Get down to every detail, dissect it, and then ask yourself, did you want that to happen or did you desire that to happen? And once you actually get into dissection of that bad moment, quote unquote, in your life, every time you're going to find 100% accuracy that you did not desire that to happen, or the converse, you desired that to happen. Whatever it is, it's going to be desire-based, and it's always going to be the achievement of that desire.
Well, what's interesting about that for me too, Jay, is the fact that some of the things that I thought were going to be really, really good and I really, really wanted and didn't get, somewhere down the road, I realized that, like a higher power had done me a huge favor by not allowing that to happen.
Absolutely right. And just in our lifetime, there's been so much rock music written about this. When the Rolling Stones talk about everything you want,
Can't always get.
Yeah, can't always get what you want. Yeah, Garth Brooks talked about it. I mean, it's a common theme that everybody understands. Just like everything we've talked about tonight, everyone understands this. They just don't really see how it roots in their life and how it can actually become, a currency they can use to improve their lives and make lives truly the sum of their desires. These are distinctions that once they become part of your life, then it improves your life.
You talk about a power that I think is real important in this part of the conversation too, and that's the power of detachment. How do you use that in your life around your wants and your desires? As a matter of fact, like with to spend what you've been on this project with your FBOs for what, 4 or 5 years?
5 years now.
Yeah, you have to be really attached to that idea to be able to continue with it. A strong desire, but at the same time, you have to be really detached from it. How do you walk that line?
Well, I'm actually calling you from an insane asylum. All the stuff I kind of made.
I totally understand. Believe me.
Well, detachment to me, obviously, all the themes are just universal in the sense, I just kind of made it my own spin. But detachment to me is the ability to look at the circumstances and experiences of your life and realize that you are participating, but it does not define who you are. You don't define your identity by every step along the path that you've chosen professionally or even in terms of emotional growth. Detachment is looking at the currencies of your life, and the current, I should say, and realizing that you are progressing down a path that you've set, you are evolving, but you're not going to derive any sense of identity from it. Because again, your identity is far beyond anything that we can project for ourselves through our mind. And that identity rests in the soul, something that we cannot understand, but we can truly live if we understand the distinction between perception and perspective.
So if I'm hearing you right, part of what's worked for you obviously is to be able to continue doing what you're doing is you've been able to find a huge amount of self-acceptance.
Absolutely right. It's a self-acceptance of knowing that, well, one, is the distinction of time. And, when I started this project, obviously I thought I'd be done in 18 months, 5 years.
Absolutely. Didn't even have a 5-year plan, right?
Hell no. 2 years, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, and so once I got past the idea of time, I said, okay, well, all the variables are still there, it's still progressing. Then I realized that, time, which emanates from the mind, that is going to cause a certain failure cloak that'll make me think that the entire plan, the entire path, has become disrupted. So that distinction is what really allowed me to detach myself from the experiences of that professional path and continue to walk it. It has not affected who I am. I have not failed. Time is just not as the mind projected. That's it.
So we're getting that static again, Jay, from your phone.
All right. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Is that better? Good.
Still static there. There, that's better. Whoop.
Is that better?
Oh yeah, there we go. Up.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, good. Because I do want our audience to hear what you have to say here. Now we still got static, don't we, Tom?
Yes, we do.
Did I lose you, Jay?
No, I'm still with you, but I'm just trying to move it around to stop the static. Is that all?
Maybe go off speaker for the end.
You want to go off speaker for the end? Because
Sure, I'll do that, sure.
Oh, there you go. And
Okay.
I think, what do we have, 4 or 5 minutes left, Tom?
Yes.
Listen, I want to offer a couple things. One, you talk about being present in a soul-like state of being. I'd like you to maybe speak to that, and then if we've missed something you'd really like to talk about, have at it. Tell us, add that into the conversation.
Okay. Well, being present in a soul-like state of being is understanding the bridge I alluded to before, that we spend our lives standing on a bridge between the past and the future, the past being anxiety and pain, and the future not existing, the anxiety, the frustration of the next moment. And over this present moment is where all the opportunity resides in our life. And once you realize that you are in the present moment and you are connected to this energy and information that is living world through our soul portal, then everything is possible. And so that is true. That's a true soul state of being, is, as you mentioned earlier, recognizing that we have a soul as consciousness itself.
Right.
And once we're in the present moment with the recognition that we have a soul and understand the soul is connected to all the energy and information that will bring us the opportunity, well, that's it. I mean, that's the trifecta.
That is the trifecta, isn't it? Yes.
And that's all it takes. And I think I stress that throughout the book and in almost every theme that I developed, that just recognizing what I'm saying about these distinctions, just recognizing the distinctions between the mind and the soul and the different things they do for us, that's all it takes. Because you already live in a soul-like state of being. It's just the mind has the Wizard of Oz veil around it. It's our choice to bring it down, to look around and see it's just a little guy with a couple levers. It's not as powerful as it'll tell us it's to be.
Well, one of the ways I've heard that expressed is that that's really a spiritual awakening that I hear you expressing there. Waking up to that larger part of ourselves.
Exactly, and it's always been there. It's just that especially as we get older and we have more experiences to accumulate and use in our spreadsheet, as you mentioned, in our mind, we start to believe that our mind is in control because it gives us some pretty clever answers to situations. And I talked about this in that presentation I mentioned, and this was another radical concept where the audience really kind of reacted to it. I said, our mind does not know the first thing about playing tennis. Doesn't know how to drive a car, doesn't know how to fly an airplane. It can't even tie up your shoes. Your mind is not capable of anything but storing information and keeping your body functioning. The rest comes from our intuition and our natural ability that is part of the projection from the soul. And if you look at professional, and just using the sports thing again, professionals are the ones where they always say, the commentators, he was really focused, he was in his game. That's because he was living well beyond his mind.
Right.
His mind was probably screaming at him the entire time. Look at McEnroe. His mind was trying to play tennis the entire time.
Well, that's real obvious. I think everybody can get a real sense of what you're saying there, Jay, if they just think about, when they first started to ride a two-wheel bike.
Exactly.
And the more they thought about what they had to do, the worse they did. Same with driving a car, a stick-shift car. And as you stop thinking about it, you start to be able to do it, much, much better. So we got about a minute left, Jay. Anything that you'd like to kick in here, or?
Well, I'll tell you, this has been the most thorough interview I've had so far, George. This has been incredible. I mean, you actually read the book. We had a great discussion about it. I mean, I couldn't be more thrilled. Thank you so much for taking so much time with me.
Well, no, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your work. I hope you sell a lot of books. This kind of thing, will lead people to, if not realizing their dreams, at least living in the middle of them. And when we're living in the middle of our dream, we have less thought about starting wars.
Absolutely right.
And so I think, that these kind of things start to make for a little more of a peaceful world. Listen, thank you for taking an hour out of your day. Maybe we'll get a chance to hook up in Panama one of these days.
That'd be great. And if you guys be in the show, just tell people about my website at zenofinancialperil.com, and they can preview the book, they can preview chapters, they can look through the themes. It's all been summarized, and they can get a good taste of what we talked about tonight.
And it's also available on our site. We will have a permanent archive of the show. At some point, I'll send you a link to that.
Okay.
And
great.
And we'll look forward to meeting at some point physically, Jay. You have a good night. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, make it good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good guy, Tom.
Yep.
Good guy, and got a good heart, and I admire his tenacity in living his passion and his dream, and I think he's a successful guy. So I guess we're out of time. Remember, next week, Dancing with God, Mary and Massey. You'll like it. You'll have a good time. Next week, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.